The ones who stayed, to love, to live. Chapter 1. The courtroom smelled like something between stationery and patience. As if truth was expected here daily, and what people actually got were formulations. I walked in with my back straight, the way they trained us in Catholic school, although I was long past the age when standing straight is a habit and not a challenge. In my hands, an envelope. That envelope. Inside it, my life. Neatly stacked documents, school photos, medical slips with 38.7 degrees on them, all marching toward the decision I had come to make. On the bench across from me sat Laurent, my son. It was shocking how much older he looked, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, the gray in his hair. But that wasn't the point. It was the emptiness behind his gaze. The boy I raised wasn't there. In his place was another man. Someone afraid of his own footsteps. Someone with a dull look and a lawyer gesturing like a conductor directing an orchestra of someone else's guilt. Judge Morrison, a man with a tired face and eyes where a trace of humanity still lived, flipped through some papers, then looked up. "Madame Reno, are you ready to submit the documents to the court?" His voice was soft, with a rasp. The tone of someone who often speaks about important things and rarely about foolish ones. I nodded, stood. The whole courtroom could see my hands shaking. Not from fear, from tension. I had carried this too long. The envelope brushed the wooden barrier like a stamp clicking shut. Truth stepping out into the open. Inside this envelope, Monsieur Judge, there aren't just medical records and school certificates. There are 15 years, without a son, with grandchildren, with loans, broken washing machines, midnight tantrums, fevers, all the things no man in this room would get through without taking up smoking, or running away the way he did. I nodded toward Laurent. The lawyer jerked upward, but the judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Maître Giraud. I want to hear Madame Reno." On the back bench sat my 3 grandsons. Daniel, tall like his grandfather, jaw tight, fingers locked together. Mark, in a leather jacket, phone in hand, wishing he were on TikTok instead of here. David, the youngest, with eyes like my daughter-in-law's. He looked at me with so much pain in his gaze. I wanted to cover him with something soft, like a warm cup of tea. "For 15 years, I continued, I cooked soup, rubbed backs when they had fevers, glued paper crafts at 2 a.m. I took Daniel to competitions, Mark to the ER after his bicycle crash, and David to talking sessions with the school psychologist. And where was he? I didn't raise my voice, but steel lay in it. Laurent looked away. The lawyer's eyes darted between his papers and the judge. "He claims I kidnapped the children." "No, Monsieur Judge. I saved them from loneliness, from the silence that devours a child when he calls for his father, and all he hears is the refrigerator humming back." The judge leaned slightly forward. "Do you have anything else to add?" I inhaled deeply, looked at Laurent. "Yes. I'm not a saint. I didn't always know the right thing to do. I cried in the bathroom when I thought I wouldn't manage. But I never, do you hear me? Never regretted having them with me. Even when there was one loaf of bread and one last tea bag for all of us." The room went silent. Only the clock on the wall ticked, like a heart unsure whether to keep beating or to finally stop. Judge Morrison glanced at his papers, then at the lawyer. "We'll move on to the children's opinion. But before that, I'd like to clarify. Madame Reno, if the court should decide so, are you willing to relinquish custody?" I turned toward my grandsons. In their eyes, light, the kind of light you see only in those who are terrified of losing what they've held on to for far too long. They are everything I have. "No, Monsieur Judge, but I am ready for an honest decision. As long as it is made not for the sake of paperwork, but for the sake of these 3 wonderful boys who became men not by law, but by love." Chapter 2. The judge unfolded the envelope with the caution of someone handling more than paper. And in truth, he was right. Inside was a life, neatly organized by dates, yet still smelling faintly of mashed potatoes, pharmacy ointment, And the peas Georges forgot to take off the stove. That's how love smells when you break it down in legal documents. First document. David, tonsillitis, 2014, the judge's assistant read aloud. But by that moment, I no longer sat on the bench. In my mind, I was back in that winter when David would wake at night, like a sad little owl, and whisper, "Grandma, you won't leave me, as Dad did?" Then I sat down beside him on the floor, buried my face in his warm hair, and said, "If I leave you, I'll drop you into a pile of blankets and kisses." David giggled. Then he cried, from relief. Next, a certificate. Mark. Best 7th grader in electrical knowledge. The photo was crooked, like life itself. Mark in Georges' oversized hoodie, pride in his eyes, pliers in his hand. Beyond the frame, you could still hear my husband's voice. Don't fear electricity, Mark. Fear an empty socket and empty words. They once spent an evening building a lamp in the backyard. Georges explained how current flows, and Mark listened with the intensity some boys reserve for rocket launch tales. Mark didn't have a rocket, but he had a grandpa, 2 meters of warmth, the smell of pipe tobacco, and a firmness that, strangely, always felt safe. Next, Daniel, Biology Olympiad 2017, prize winner. The judge flicked through documents while my boys kept their eyes cast downward. They remembered all of it, but had forgotten they could prove it. Daniel was stubborn. Like his grandpa, like me, he spent nights memorizing cell structures because I told him, "You'll make it, I believe. And when Grandma believes, how could you fail?" And this? The judge lifted a newspaper clipping. Headline read, "Woman from Vanves raises 3 grandchildren and helps an animal shelter." In the photo, me, holding a crooked-legged puppy named Napoleon. That puppy grew into the kindest Labrador, sleeping on David's mat during his teenage insomnia spells. "This is unofficial," the judge said quietly, "but I think it matters." He set the clipping aside. I allowed myself a small smile. My lips trembled, not with anxiety, but memory. That day, my husband Georges sat with that newspaper like it were a medal. He read every line aloud as though it were a presidential decree. Then he said, "There, now we're officially good people." He was already sick then, but still joking. 2 months later, he was gone. The final sheet, a letter from the school psychologist. Despite difficult life circumstances, the boys demonstrate high empathy and social adaptation. The home environment is stable and supportive. The judge said nothing. He just folded the papers back, as if fitting together a mosaic where every piece suddenly found its place. He looked at me. "All these materials are accepted. And you know," he paused, "I'd like my children, someday, to bring me documents like these. Not in a folder of papers, but in the one inside, between memory and what remains of love." A soft murmur ran through the courtroom. Even Laurent's lawyer twitched at the corners of his mouth. Only my son sat with a face of stone. Maybe he didn't remember the smell of burnt pie. Or maybe he didn't want to. Chapter 3. The judge made a note in the file, then removed his glasses and looked over them. Like a headmaster in a school before a serious talk. I recognized that look. George used it too, when young David declared he was leaving home with nothing but pajamas and cheese. "Now I would like to hear from the young people themselves," the judge said. The courtroom fell silent, like the moment before a storm. Everything paused, and in the air hung a question from which there is no turning back. I clenched my palms. Not from fear, from the weight of what was coming. My boys, mine, were about to speak aloud what I could not say, and perhaps should not have to. First stood Daniel, our eldest. He is 20, tall, angular, with hands like a surgeon's, and a voice you trust, even if he says, "I accidentally broke a window." He stepped forward and said, "Monsieur Judge, we are not victims, not lost boys, as sometimes people call us online. We are the grandchildren of Rachel Reno, and that says a lot." I almost choked on air. That was him, my boy. He looked at me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. This was a court, not a play. Though sometimes, I admit, you couldn't tell the difference. We didn't need a father because we had Grandpa Georges, Daniel went on. He taught us to keep our word, to gut fish, to respect women. And if you ask me, he did better than some people in this room. Pause. Someone cleared their throat softly. I clenched my fist under the table to stop myself from applauding. I don't hate Laurent. He's not part of my life. He never was, he shrugged. He's a name in an old letter. You remember the handwriting? You recognize the letters? But you can't make sense of it anymore. He sat down. I stayed standing, though the lump in my throat felt like a grapefruit. Thank you. Monsieur Marc? The judge said. Marc jumped to his feet, as if called to the blackboard. I'll be quick, Monsieur Judge. I hate long speeches. Of course. That's Marc, the master of sharp words. When I was little, I had a temperature near 40 degrees. I remember lying there, delirious. I asked, "Where is Dad?" He looked at the judge, and Grandma said, "He's on a business trip." Back then, I believed her. I needed to believe. Later, I understood. A business trip that lasts a lifetime. That's either space travel or nonsense. A soft snort went through the hall. Even the judge smiled a little. Laurent dropped his eyes. I don't know why he's here. Maybe he really wants to come back. But, as they say, if sorry could fix wires, I would have rewired the house myself when I was 9. Laughter. Even I couldn't hold back. I covered my mouth with a hand. I wouldn't be against him being here, but only if he's honest. No masks, no, I'll fix everything. Just as a person, no loud words. He sat, looked at me. I nodded back at him. David? The judge called. David stood last, the quietest, the most sensitive. He has always been, with a book, with a dog, with a dream on his forehead. I was 3 when he left. I don't remember him, but I do remember how Grandma used to tell me. A father isn't always someone who's near, but someone who doesn't let you fall when the ground disappears under your feet. I almost cried. I saw Grandma washing our clothes by hand when the machine broke. I saw her reading us bedtime stories, even when she couldn't keep the book up from exhaustion. I saw her holding Grandpa's hand on his last night. That, all of it, is family. The judge listened, without interrupting. But I'd still like to meet Laurent. Not as a father, as a person. I think I can't fully understand myself without knowing where part of me comes from. He fell silent. His voice trembled, not from weakness, but from honesty. The judge closed the file, sighed. Your testimonies are heard. The situation isn't simple, but it isn't a verdict. The court rules 3 months of voluntary supervised contact with Laurent. All meetings to take place with a psychologist present, and the father has no right to act independently. I squeezed my hands. 3 months, like a lifetime. But if they've decided to try, I will be there. The trial ended. My boys came to me. No one spoke. Only Daniel laid his hand on my shoulder and quietly said, "Even if someday everything we lacked comes back, we will stay with those who were there when there was nothing but you and Grandpa." Chapter 4. The house smelled of frying onions and a faint trace of fatigue. Not the kind that aches, but the kind you feel in every step, like when David tried walking on tiptoes so as not to wake Grandpa. I stood by the stove, stirring the soup. Nothing special. Lentils, a little carrot and onion, bay leaf, and a few drops of lemon juice for liveliness, but something was soothing about it. While the world spins out of control, Grandma makes soup. Like a lighthouse, a proof that the home still exists. And you still put garlic in it, like Grandpa asked? Marc peered into the pot as if it were a well of memories. Of course, I smiled. Though he'd complain it made it bitter. But he finished every last spoonful. Daniel and David set the plate silently, as if by agreement until I started speaking. They waited, and I searched in myself for the words I'd been afraid to speak for 15 years. When everyone sat down, I ladled the soup. 3 bowls. My own, later. First, theirs. Well, I sighed, looking at them. You have the right to know everything, how it really was. The house went so quiet that even a spoon slipping into the soup sounded like thunder. Your mother! I lowered my eyes. She died during her 4th childbirth. It was a baby girl. She lived only 2 days, small as a fist. No name, no weight, only a breath. And then, nothing. David instinctively pushed his bowl away. Mark dropped his eyes. Daniel turned still, like a rock. Laurent? He wasn't ready. He yelled at the doctors, then at me. Said it was all our fault, that we didn't hold on to her, didn't save her. I took a sip of water to steady myself. In a week, he left a note on the table. I can't. That was it. Mark snorted. Minimalist, as always. I smiled, through tears. Then I thought, that's it. No money, no job with you 3. But then George came home, set a pot on the stove and said, Well then, madame, shall we start over? He was a hero, Daniel whispered. He was a stubborn old man with a kind heart, I corrected, and a better parenting partner than your father ever was. He taught you everything he knew, even how to skip stones across water, with the precision he called art. And do you remember how he cooked fish? David smiled, with lemon and black pepper, even though he said, pepper is for those who have no taste. We laughed, fragile, light laughter, like cracked glass that hasn't broken yet. And then he left, I continued. Slowly, quietly, as if he didn't want to disturb. I held his hand on his last night. He said, You'll manage. You always manage. And I thought then, what if I can't be strong anymore? Mark stood up, walked over, sat down beside me. You did it, even more. We grew up. We are alive. We are normal. You are wonderful. I corrected him. I often doubted, feared I had cooked wrong, spoken wrong. Maybe you needed a father, that you'd look for him and resent me. And we did look, said Daniel. But we found Grandpa and you. Sometimes, added David, I thought it was my fault, that I was too loud a child, that Dad left because I disturbed him. I squeezed his hand. David, listen to me. You never disturbed anyone. He didn't leave because of you. He left himself. He didn't know how to be a grown-up, and he still doesn't. We sat in silence while the soup cooled. The kitchen breathed a hush. Not a tense one, but the comfort after rain. When the earth steams and you realize everything that could get wet, already soaked through, now you can breathe again. Chapter 5. The morning came sunny, almost brazen in its clarity, as if determined to make up for all the rains when I had no umbrella and no mood. I sipped coffee on the balcony, wrapped in the knitted blanket, the one I'd knitted while David lay sick with bronchitis. The blanket was like a photo album, in every stitch, a sleepless night. In my hand, a letter, a plain white envelope with an insurance company's logo. I tensed immediately. Nobody writes to me without cause, and when they do, the causes are usually unpleasant. We inform you that the insurance fund created during the lifetime of your daughter-in-law, Marie Reno, with beneficiaries designated as Daniel, Mark, and David Reno, amounts to $740,000. My mouth went dry. The numbers danced on the paper like actors in a tragedy, while I watched with a stony face. We never knew about this. No one did. Neither I nor the boys. The insurance had been arranged by Marie's father, holding on to hope until the end that his grandchildren would someday feel that security isn't a word on paper, but real. I laid the letter on the table and lit a cigarette. The last time I smoked was with Georges. He told me then, if you smoke, let it be after good sex or big news. Since then, I only ever honored the second. So, here it was. This was what Laurent really came back for. First, the trial. Then, his sudden interest in the children. Now, money. Everything finally fell into place, but I wasn't someone who concluded without proof. In me lived the toughness of accountants and the curiosity of former librarians. So, I went to see Catherine, my friend, a former lawyer, now mother of 5 cats and self-appointed justice watchdog of our block. He's deep in debt, Catherine said without looking up from her coffee. Up to his ears. Spanish firm, sham marriage, and unpaid loans. Not currently listed as wanted. But his name crops up in an investigation of investment fraud. Not proven. But the trail's there. So he came back for love, I snorted. Catherine shrugged. Or out of necessity. Sometimes both. I thanked her, walked out, and as I strolled down the street, I thought, maybe he's really trying to fix things. He just doesn't know how, but I pulled myself back. Just like childhood trust. It doesn't begin with a belated knock on a door. That evening, I told the boys about the letter. Mom had insurance on us? Daniel asked in surprise. Why didn't anyone know? Because, I suppose, she didn't want money to become meaningful. She wanted you to live, to grow, and not wait for money as salvation. Did Dad know? Mark ruffled his hair. I shrugged. I guess now he does. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been arranged. Mark scoffed. Perfect. Now we're not just grandchildren. We're walking wallets. Does it change anything? David asked. No, I answered. It's like peeling an onion, layer after layer, and each one stings harder than the last. I decided I need to meet him. No court, no lawyers, no pomp. Just eyes to eyes. If he came for money, let him see that behind those euros there are years. Not a bank, but a family. Not numbers, but characters he abandoned before they even had a chance to form. I finished my evening tea, placed the cup in the sink, and looked out the window. Outside, Paris, as always, slept, indifferent, beautiful, stubborn, like Laurent, like me. Chapter 6. The Café des Tilleuls, stood on the corner of the square, like an old postcard forgotten at the bottom of a drawer. Behind the glass, muted light, creaking floorboards, a waiter in a milky foam-colored shirt. Inside, it smelled of caramel, cinnamon, and something cozy, like my grandmother's dresser, where letters used to lie. I was the first to arrive. I always was, at the pediatrician's, at school, and throughout my grandchildren's lives. I chose the table by the window, ordered bergamot tea and a croissant I didn't intend to eat. Just to feel I wasn't alone. 15 minutes later, Laurent appeared. His walk was uncertain, like a pupil called to the blackboard who hasn't learned his lesson. He wore a worn gray coat, his face older, his eyes hiding more than he was ready to say. Mom, he said, sliding into the seat. I thought you'd say Madame. I didn't want to start with a lie. He paused. I took a sip of tea. Laurent stared at his hands. I'm not here for the money, he said. Of course not. It's just a coincidence. Insurance, kids, and you. Suddenly touched by fatherly feelings, he sighed. Not angry, not defensive. I got lost. I had years wrapped in the fog of words I couldn't utter. I remember running out of the maternity ward, being afraid to look you in the eye. I hated myself. Hated you. Us? Yes. Because you reminded me of her, of Marie, and I didn't know how to live without her. I'm weak, Mom. I'm not a hero, not like you, or Father. I tightened my hands around the teapot. It was hot, burning, but I didn't pull away. You know, Laurent, I replayed our last goodbye several times. The way you walked away without turning back, now I think, good you didn't. If you had looked back, I wouldn't have been able to let you go. And you wanted to disappear. So you did, he nodded, like accepting a verdict he'd known by heart. I've seen them. In court. They've grown up. Handsome, smart, real. All that. It's you, Mom. It's life. I corrected quietly. I just didn't run away when I was scared. He pulled out a slip of paper from his pocket. Here, an offer. My firm can help arrange the money so taxes don't touch it. I don't want the money, but I want to stay close, even a little. I took the paper without looking. I tore it in half. Then again, as one tears promises that were never meant to be. You don't get it. He tried again. No, Laurent, you don't get it. Money isn't about taxes. It's about trust. And you spent that, all of it. He turned away toward the window. On the street outside, children played. A girl chasing pigeons, as if she were a dancer chasing her thoughts. "Do you hate me?" he asked. "I gave birth to you, Laurent. You can't hate what grew inside you for 9 months," I said. "But I can't love blindly anymore." Silence. The croissant remained untouched. The tea grew cold. "You know they don't remember you, only a shadow. Don't force them to stare into nothing. If there's nothing for them to find." He stood up. "I ruined everything," he murmured. "Maybe," I answered. "Or maybe you just couldn't do it." He left, didn't look back, and I exhaled. Not out of joy, but because I finally knew. Everything I did for 15 years was not in vain. Chapter 7. The phone rang at 7:13 a.m. Normally, at that hour, I'm pulling fresh bread out of the oven. I have a rule. If a day begins with warm bread, it can't be entirely bad. But this time, instead of the smell of golden crust, there was anxiety and a call from an unknown number. "Madame Reno, this is the Paris police. We are calling to inform you that Laurent Reno has been detained on suspicion of involvement in financial fraud. He has been arrested, along with a presumed accomplice, a woman named Alicia Brunier." I said nothing. I simply sat down on a stool, as if gravity in my home had been switched off. "Is he okay?" I finally asked. "Physically, yes. Psychologically, that's hard to say." After the call, I sat embracing a cup of tea, long since gone cold. In my head, emptiness. No anger even, only bitterness, like an over-salted soup you still eat because you refuse to waste food. 2 days later, Laurent called from jail. His voice was muffled, as if he were speaking from a box under the bed. "Mom." "Laurent, I didn't know things would end up like this. I thought, an investigation, temporary difficulties. Alicia, she dragged me into this. You're an adult. Enough with, I didn't know." He fell silent. "I'd like to offer something," he finally said. I raised an eyebrow. Even over the phone, he heard it. "I have documents. If I hand them over to the investigation, my sentence could be reduced, but I want something in return." "Laurent, are you seriously trying to make a deal with me? If you renounce custody, if the children live with me, even under supervision, but I want a fresh start. We have a chance." I stood up. I simply couldn't continue the conversation sitting down. "You want to trade information for children? You decided they're merchandise?" He stayed silent. "Listen, Laurent, you had chances. When Mark broke his arm and you didn't show up. When Daniel got his first and you didn't call. When David was afraid of the dark and I didn't know how to light 2 night lamps at once. Back then, you still had chances." I spoke evenly, without shouting. "That's the scariest. You didn't lose the kids. You lost yourself, and I'm not going to pay for your clumsy navigation through life. I am not customs control, and children are not currency." "So, that's it?" he asked. "End is when a person dies. You're still alive, so choose who you want to be, a human or an eternal excuse." I hung up. Then, after a minute, I turned on the radio. An old song about the sea was playing. "George used to love it. He said, 'As long as you still hear music, you live. Once it fades, you just survive.'" I turned the volume up. Chapter 8. That evening, we had pasta with ground meat for dinner. Too simple a dish to mark existential conversations, but exactly the kind that keeps families afloat. I sat in my place, like a captain at the wheel, and my 3 boys, no longer really boys, waited while I took the floor. On the table, there was a bottle of cheap red wine, the kind you buy not for its taste, but for the ritual. David poured half a glass for each. Even for himself. "I'm going to tell you everything," I said. "Just don't interrupt. I need to speak it out." They nodded silently. Even Mark, usually restless, sat still. "They arrested Laurent," I began. "For fraud. It's complicated. Shell companies, fake marriage, bank accounts. He's facing a prison sentence. He called me. Wanted to make a deal." "A deal?" Mark exhaled sharply. "What? Trading freedom for us?" "Almost. He said he could offer the investigators documents in exchange for custody." A chance to be near you. That's how he phrased it. Daniel closed his eyes. And you? I told him we're not things. And we won't trade. Silence. Even the radio somewhere in the next room seemed to have lowered its volume. He doesn't get it, whispered David. Being a father isn't a right. It's work. Daily. Dirty. With sleepless nights, with snot, with exams, with broken bikes and skipped grocery runs for tea, added Mark. Daniel sighed. I kept hoping, not that I'd forgive, just that he might try. Honestly, I looked at them and suddenly realized they've grown up. And now, this isn't just I raised them, they are people, real ones. I'm tired of being your only support, I said. Not because I'm exhausted, but because you're already standing, firm, each in your own way, and now you have the right to decide whether you want him in your lives. Silence. Then Daniel raised his head. He's part of our history, but not our family. I don't want to hate him, but I won't pretend he means something to us. Me neither, nodded Mark. To me, he's like biology class. Kinda important, but not my subject. David let a small smile touch his lips. Sometimes I even feel sorry for him. He lost himself. That must be scary. I felt my throat tighten, not with sorrow, but with pride. Then maybe we should reply to him? David asked, with one letter. No anger, just, as we are. You can, I answered. But only from you, without my words. He didn't ask for me back. He asked for you. We stayed at the table long after. The wine warmed, the pasta cooled, but no one complained. That night, no one turned on the TV. David went to his room and wrote for a long while. Mark cleaned the aquarium. Daniel stood on the balcony, looking at the stars, as George once did, with the same question in his eyes. Did I do it right? I lay alone in my room, hands under my head. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not anxiety, but peace. I knew then. Now, everything will really be all right. Reno, as a sign that they choose not him, but me. We are Reno, real Reno, said Daniel. Not by papers, by essence, added Mark. And by heart, concluded David. In the backyard, a dog from a shelter settled, shaggy, awkward, but with the most faithful eyes in the world. We named him Georgie because, as Mark said, this dog barks exactly like Grandpa did when someone forgot to close the gate. And now I drink coffee in the mornings, listen to the birds, and think, this is the meaning. Not that everything is perfect, but that everything is with love. Chapter 10. Autumn in Provence arrives without warning. First, the mornings grow a little cooler. Then leaves begin to fall, like powdered sugar dusting a croissant. And soon you find yourself reaching for a warm sweater. Not because you're cold, but because you crave comfort. In the house lingered the scent of rosemary baked potatoes, warm bread, and that rare kind of calm, the kind you rarely find in a noisy, hurried world. I stood by the window, watching the wind chase leaves across the yard, and Georgie chasing the wind. On the table lay a stack of letters. The handwriting was familiar, angular, accented with strained swoops. Letters from Laurent, sent from prison. Not often. Perhaps once a month. Each began the same way. Mom, I don't know where to start, so I'll start by saying I'm ashamed. I read only the first. The rest went into a box. The same box I used to store old photos and my grandchildren's childhood drawings. That morning, David asked, Mom, you still haven't replied to him? I sighed. No. Sometimes a reply is silence. He asks for forgiveness, and I'm not angry anymore. I just don't want to go back to that part of me, always waiting for him to understand. But you forgave him? Yes, in my own way. But I still closed the door. David nodded quietly. He understood. No need for more words. That evening we had dinner. The whole family gathered around the big table in the garden. The air smelled of melted cheese. Laughter drifted between string lights Mark had hung around the gazebo, and Georgie sat hopeful, looking up at Daniel, pretending to be dying of hunger just to get a scrap. Remember what Grandpa used to say? If the table is noisy, it means the meal was good. Mark raised his glass. Grandpa said many things, I smiled softly. But the ones he said best, he said without words. Just a wink, when no one was looking. And you pretended you didn't like it, added Daniel. Because a woman should always pretend, I replied, especially when she actually likes it. We laughed, fully, genuinely, lightly, with warmth. He also used to say, family isn't who you're born from, it's who you want to shelter you when it rains. We clinked our glasses of homemade cider. The sky overhead was clear. Stars shone boldly, as though they earned applause. After dinner, I stayed alone with the box of letters. I took the top one, ran my fingers along its folded crease, then placed it back gently, closed the lid. I walked to the shelf, grabbed a marker, and wrote, "Do not throw away. Maybe later." Next morning, David spotted the box on the top shelf of the storage closet. "Will you read the rest someday?" "Maybe," I replied, "when I understand why. For now, I just want them to be kept." Forgiveness is not about unlocking a door. It's simply about no longer locking it. Sunlight lay once again on the windowsill. On the table, a cup of tea. In the house, laughter. And in the air, a lightness. Not the breezy kind, but the kind that comes when it's finally over. And you are not broken. You've grown, my dear. We all make mistakes. But I learned this. A mistake repeated twice, that becomes a choice. And a choice is responsibility, and it's also freedom. Thank you for living this story with me. If you have your own, even 3 lines, write them down. I promise to read them. Wrapped in a blanket, with tea and belief that it's possible to begin again, even halfway through.